Donc, j'évoquais cette séance qui s'intitule Politique Fiction et qui va donc nous permettre d'écouter Sara Casoli, tout à gauche, enfin à ma gauche. Elle est chercheuse post-doctorante en études médiatiques et télévisuelles au département des arts de l'Université de Bologne et membre du projet Détect. Elle a soutenu son doctorat en 2019 à l'Université de Bologne en présentant une thèse sur les personnages de séries télévisées contemporaines. Ses recherches portent sur les théories de la sérialité, les études visuelles, les personnages transmédia et les séries criminelles télévisuelles. Parmi ses dernières publications, alors attention à mon italien, Imma Tatarani, ça je pense que c'est un personnage, Imma Tatarani e l'amore transgenerazionale, la rappresentazione della sessualità femminile in età matura nella serialità televisiva italiana, et c'est dans un ouvrage collectif qui s'intitule Aging Girls, alors, Aging Girls, sous la direction de Valentina Re et Elisa Mandeli. Elle a également écrit un article en collaboration avec Luca Antoniazzi sur le Sherlock de la BBC et l'européanité, une étude de cas de la circulation des séries télévisées européennes en Italie. Donc ça, c'est en anglais, dans une revue à venir, enfin dans un numéro de Cinéma et compagnie, numéro à venir. Voilà. Quant à Silvia Baroni, qui est à ma gauche immédiatement, elle est chercheuse en postdoctorante également à l'Université de Bologne et employée sur le projet Détect. Enfin, elle consacre aussi du temps au projet Détect. Elle a soutenu une thèse en co-tutelle à l'Université de Bologne et à l'Université de Paris-Est sur les éditions illustrées de Balzac. On ne l'attendait pas là, mais elle s'intéresse à la fiction criminelle européenne contemporaine dans une perspective transmédia, aux romans européens du XIXe siècle et aux relations entre art et littérature. Parmi ses derniers articles, Au seuil de l'enfer, la scène dans la comédie humaine, dans la revue Arborescence publiée en 2018, et du paratexte au contre-texte, les illustrations de la comédie humaine dans la revue Interférence littéraire, le numéro 23, publié en mai 2019. Je leur laisse la parole pour parler donc de Carlo Lucarelli, qu'elles connaissent assez bien pour avoir imaginé, je crois, un itinéraire à Bologne sur les traces de Lucarelli.
Yes.
Donc, avis à ceux qui vont visiter Bologne bientôt.
Okay, so thank you very much, Kathleen, for your very kind introduction. And we would also like to thank all the organizers for hosting the conference. So without any further delay, I will start our presentation. With our paper, we want to highlight a case study that marks another turn in the reflection upon the blurring between facts and fiction in the crime genre. Carlo Lucarelli, one of the most influential figures in the field of Italian contemporary crime narratives, distinguishes himself for being an author who breaks the boundaries separating facts and fiction, but also genres, media with great fluidity. In order to comprehend his polysemous meta-narrative activity, we will analyze his multimedia production, concentrating in particular on his literary outputs and his career as TV host and presenter. Our goal is to highlight the continuous interweaving of two apparently opposite tendencies, his eagerness to report truthful events and his willingness to pursue the pleasure of telling a story, especially through the codes of the noir genre. This propensity is also embodied by Lucarelli himself, who is characterized for being a figure always at the threshold of divergent status and role. So let's start by briefly presenting Carlo Lucarelli. Born in Parma in 1960, he started his literary career in 1990 with the novel Carta Bianca, the first volume of the series Il Commissario De Luca. A few months later, he co-founded with Marcello Fois and Loriano Machiavelli the Gruppo 13, a group of writers that, along with the Scuola dei Duri in Milan and the Gruppo Neo-Noir in Rome, has significantly contributed to the renewal of the Italian crime genre. That was a really prolific period for Lucarelli, who wrote two other novels of the series De Luca and the entire series of Inspector Coliandro, composed by a short story, different two short novels, and a cycle of 5 graphic short stories in collaboration with the comics artist Onofrio Catacchio. He started the series of Inspector Grazianegro in 1994 and published Almost Blue, perhaps his most famous work, in 1997. During these years, he published also several short stories, which have been collected in different volumes during the 2000s, and has become a columnist for national newspapers and magazines, such as Il Manifesto, Il Messaggero, and Unità. For this production, he is soon considered one of the main exponents of Italian noir fiction, and nowadays he is one of the most famous Italian crime writers, also in international context. Nevertheless, since 2000, his main production is represented by a corpus of essays written in collaboration with the criminologist Massimo Picozzi on true crimes. He continues writing fiction, such as the short stories and novels of the Grazia Negro and the Luca series, but his fictional production undoubtedly suffered a setback. The reasons are due to Lucarelli's transmedial vocation. In fact, besides his being a writer, his fame is connected to his activity as TV presenter and Italian to crime TV show, like the cult program Blue Notte and noirish docuseries or sort of about literature, art, and history. He is also a successful screenwriter for cinema and especially for television, with TV series like L'Ispettore Coliandro and Commissario De Luca, both adapted from his novels, and the successful La Porta Rossa. Moreover, he is also a theatrical author, a podcaster, and a radio host. You can appreciate Lucarelli's productivity, especially in this case in literature, with all these series, and also his activity in other media, like cinema, television, but also radio and podcast. So, even from this quick overview, we can appreciate how Lucarelli's production is based on a principle of medial mixture and textual hybridization. As Elisabetta Baccaretti highlights, his work, and I quote, is curious and open to experimentation with multiple expressive codes: fiction, news, television, radio, theater, comics, video clips, and cinema. Linguistically mimetic, full of visual and phonic suggestions, and intertwined with cinematic and musical intertextual references, end of quote. Lucarelli's constitutive vocation to mix media, genres, and narrative codes can be explained by the fact that his main goal is to narrate mysterious stories in all their possible forms. Indeed, as reported in many interviews, he identifies himself as the author of mysteries, a nebulous critical label that, broadly speaking, comprehends, as John Cowlty suggested, and I quote, the investigation and the discovery of hidden secrets, end of quote, and so can be referred both to fictional and factual narratives. Taking advantage of the fuzziness of the label and its tendency to circumvent generic and medial borders, Lucarelli can narrate stories of mystery without necessarily having to respect narrative and stylistic conventions, but on the contrary, being able to merge expressive and discursive codes.
So the first question we will try to answer is, how does Lucarelli blur crime fiction and true crime? Let's start analyzing this literary production, where the fictionalization of factual puts into question the genre blending between noir narrative, historic novel, and journalism from its very first series created by Lucarelli, devoted to Commissario De Luca. The story is set during the fascist period, starting from the late 40s, after the liberation of Bologna by the Allies in winter 1943. Yet the volumes do not follow chronological order. The first book, Carta Bianca, is set in late 40s, while the last novel published, L'Inverno più nero, De Luca is acting in Bologna in the 1943, occupied by the German army. Lucarelli talks about his interest in history in an interview released for the presentation of the novel. And I quote, "This is the part I prefer writing novels, that is, doing researches and finding out something you would never imagine. I had already spoken with witnesses during my researches for L'estate torbida. For this novel, L'Inverno più nero, I read historical books, and for the descriptions of everyday life, I looked at beautiful photographic books that had been published on that period. I was really interested in the photographies representing the bombed palaces. For instance, there was a building split open, a shelving on the second floor with all the books poised. That is what makes you see and understand that period. Also, newspapers are a very important source. I've read all the issues of Il Resto del Carlino, in which the first page was devoted to what the regime wanted to tell, that is, we are winning, while from the second page, it starts telling the truth, that is, where you can buy beetroot, and what time, what you can go to buy them, the streets you cannot go through because they have been bombed, etc. Now, this is what makes you understand what was real life during that period. End of the quote. As Lucarelli explains, he started his historical researches from the very beginning of his career during his work on his BA thesis on this historical period, for which he had collected lots of documents which have become the basis for the reconstruction of the setting of the Lucas novel. As a matter of fact, from these researches, Lucarelli also discovered many important episodes occurred during the Bologna occupancy, which have been forgotten in time and seems perfect for another story. Let's stay focused on the latest novel of the series, L'Inverno più nero, which is indeed crucial for our aim. De Luca is called to inquire about 3 murders. His inquiries are strictly interlaced with political interests, implying Nazi soldiers, as well as Italian fascist policemen and agents de la résistance, such as Agent Petrarca, who helps De Luca solving the 3 cases thanks to his personal photographic archive on Nazis and fascist crime. De Luca ran from a zone of the city to another to solve the case, and during these passages, we find descriptions of the center of the city, which were rarer in the previous books of the series, representing the situation of the citizens and refugees, massed in every kind of buildings, just theaters and churches, with cows and chicks, trying to find a place to live after the bombings. At the end of the book, in the section Ringraziamenti, Lucarelli explains that the character of Petrarca is actually inspired by an historical policeman who really collected a photographic archive documenting Nazi's crime in order to assure the perpetrators to justice after the victory of the Allies. To explain this fact, Lucarelli makes a preliminary reflection upon the work of the writer. I quote, "Writers do steal. I mean, the novelists do. Maybe other writers also do that. I do not know. I am speaking for myself. We steal from life, from people, from their memories, from what we listen to walking in the street, what we have collected and assimilated, as well as from others' writers' scriptorium, as Raymond Chandler said. Historical novelists steal also from history, which is always with the capital letter, even if it is the story of one single person. And it is always so wonderful, incredible, and trivially illogical that it seems a novel." This paragraph resumes a veritable leitmotif of Lucarelli's poetics. Sometimes reality is more mysterious and complex than the story of a novelist could ever imagine. That's why Lucarelli inspires himself to real facts, such as the case of the agent Petrarca. As he explains in several interviews, unsolved real cases interest him immensely because they embody mystery. But it is not just a matter of inspiration. The idea that reality is more incredible than fiction makes him bring reality in his books by reporting excerpts of newspapers articles of that period. This mechanism not only evokes the impression of hyperrealism, and I quote Balzac, wherein Pergoriot said, "All is true, we are in the same philosophy." Balzac, c'est là, voilà. But constitute a sort of collective archive aiming the preservation of memory. And I quote again Lucarelli. "I believe that I was trying to speak about a certain way to be Italian. What kind of way I still do not know, but no doubt a way to be Italian that is strictly linked to my interest on the dark side of things. So that is a way of being Italian, for better or for worse, whose roots are ancient. With my knowledge, I can represent it from the beginning of the 20th centuries. I have presented the Misteri d'Italia, and it is strange how the same names that I crossed during my researches for the Commissario De Luca series recurred 50 years later. In that period, we can discover several forgotten roots that I like to represent in my stories." It is clear then that Lucarelli aims at representing this historical period of Italy, along with colonialism and the Spanish Civil War, to detect the roots of contemporary Italian society. At this point, from what we have seen, we are led to conceive Lucarelli as a writer of historical crime fiction. Yet, other details present in the paratext scale back this portrait. Lucarelli himself underlines that these newspapers articles do not always report the real date of that event. He also added that he uses songs that actually dated some years after 1943. These details are a kind of clue in our investigation on Lucarelli's attitude vis-à-vis historical facts. These little distortions of facts demonstrate that the real aim of Lucarelli is not to reconstruct history through his narrations. The real scope is the narrability of history, and especially mysterious micro-stories. Of course, historical facts have a major role, but facts can be shaped after the needs of the fiction. Carlo Lucarelli's real matter is, and I quote, how a story, a mysterious story, can be told in order to fascinate the reader. How can I infuse the interest I have for mysterious facts in a crime story? End of the quote. So Lucarelli voluntarily constructs an ambiguous limit between factual and fictional through the use of newspapers, which create, on one hand, a powerful effet du réel, besides with realism in description, and on the other, demonstrate that he is not an historian, but a writer, looking more for the pleasure of the story, rather than the description of historical truth. Indeed, it is not the first time Lucarelli impressed newspapers articles in his crime fiction. Two previous cases can be detected in his works, in his series, as well in his stories collected after the TV show Blu Notte, which Sara will comment later in detail. I will not analyze this short story collection, which are mainly a transcription of certain cases he presented in TV shows. On the contrary, I will focus my attention on a short story written in collaboration with Andrea Camilleri, titled Acqua in Bocca, inspired to a true crime, the case of Max Iori, who was murdered in Rimini in 1997, a case that Lucarelli had presented at the end of the 90s in Misteri d'Italia. This blurring between factual and fiction, which is not explicit, I discovered this occurrence by chance, is reinforced by the presence of fragments of articles taken from Il Resto del Carlino and Il Corriere della Sera. However, the excerpt of the articles concern the situation, However, in this case, the function of newspapers article is more ambiguous. If in L'Inverno più nero, the extract concerned the situation of everyday life in Bologna during the Second World War, in these short stories, articles report the murders and the incident occurred in the plot of Inspector Grazianegro and Salvo Montalbano, but without citing their name, as if that were real events. So that it's really difficult to say at first if these articles are invented or real historical faits divers. These materials in this case represent a kind of narrative game rather than a collective memory archive. They are not only a strategy to blur factual and fiction, but also a mystery in the mystery for the reader, who can play the role of the sleuth in finding out if these articles are real or not. Besides these articles, other documents appear in the book and are completed with photos, ID documents, official dossier, affiche, and also the handmade signatures of Grazianegro, Salvo Montalbano, and Marco Coliandro, that are the main characters of Camilleri and Lucarelli. So it is evident that with Acqua in Bocca, Lucarelli and Camilleri, of course, has played with the interference between factual and fiction, tried to present fiction as it was reality.
Well, the meta-narrative and blurring figure of Carlo Lucarelli emerges also in the many TV shows he has hosted since the end of the 90s. In all his shows, Lucarelli, as narrator and presenter, discusses murders and unsolved mysteries with the help of interviews, the involvement of experts, dramatized reconstructions, and crime scene reenactments. However, while some of these programs deal with real crimes and murders, Others concern crime fiction masterpieces. The result of this playing with the different codes of the factual and the fictional is a collection of TV shows that, on one side, tends to a fictionalization of facts, and on the other, to a factualization of fiction. For what concerns the first tendency, Blu Notte, Lucarelli's first TV show, is a case in point. Aired between 1998 and 2013, the show, which can be labeled as a true crime, a genre broadly understood as a non-fiction textual artifact in which the author examines criminal events actually happened, reconstructs Italian crime cases, spanning from unresolved murder mysteries to political intrigues, notorious massacres, and conspiracies. What at first sight could be considered as a documentary-style approach to these crimes actually proves to be highly fictionalized. Of course, the mix of fictional narrative and non-fiction is constitutive of the true crime genre, which operates on a principle of ambiguity. All true crime shows, although with different levels of refinement, tended to emphasize the storiness of the facts by adopting narrative and fictional forms rather than the codes of the journalistic reportage. The level of narrativization of real murders and crimes operated by Lucarelli, however, is rather unique in the Italian scenario and, as we will see, deeply connected with his being a figure constantly moving between reality and fiction. In Blu Notte, there is not a mere infiltration of fictional, both literary and televisual devices into the recalling of actually happened crimes, which is a typical feature of true crime products. Lucarelli operates both on a narrative and figurative level to destabilize the factuality of the stories by shaping these really happened murders as they were fictional crimes imagined by some crime writer. For example, in the second episode of the second season dedicated to the unsolved murder of Luigia Borrelli, also known as Simonetta, Lucarelli starts pronouncing these words, and I quote, "The story we narrate tonight about Simonetta is not only a hideous story, but also a mysterious one, which seems to come out of a detective novel written by Ellery Quinn, or it would be the story of Edith by Patricia Highsmith. And if someone had wanted to adapt it for cinema, it would certainly have been a great director like Alfred Hitchcock. But Simonetta and Luigia's stories remains a hideous one, because it is not a novel or a film, it is a true story," end of quote. Although Lucarelli always takes care to remind the spectators that all these stories are true, the continuous references throughout the episode to famous crime writers such as Agatha Christie, Edgar Allan Poe, Stephen King, and directors like Hitchcock, Polanski, or Tarantino inevitably weaken the trueness of the stories. The semantic short circuit between facts and fiction is evident also on a figurative level in the stylistic mise-en-scène of the show. For example, Lucarelli is frequently framed with a collection of Giallo Mondadori books in the background, establishing a strong connection with the tradition of Italian crime fiction. Moreover, the visual fictionalization of the stories narrating becomes more explicit in the sequences that concern experts and people directly involved in the case, witnesses, police officers, and consultants. These scenes where Lucarelli reconstructs the case and the investigation with the help of two Italian investigative journalists, Alessandro Riva and Lorenzo Viganò, and sometimes also with the help and the technical advice of a forensic officer, clearly evokes the visual style of noir and neo-noir film. Oh, sorry, spoiler. With sharp light contrasts, complementary colors, shadowy close-up, and gloomy settings. You can have some examples, sorry for the light, in this screenshot. Significantly, the visual style of the mise-en-scène exasperates its noir tones just when the story displays its highest factuality, that's to say, when the experts reconstruct and report the facts from a scientific point of view. Through a narrative and figurative construction that relies on a fictionalization of true crime cases, Lucarelli poses himself not just as a reporter, but as a narrator. While reporting the facts and reconstructing what happened, also taking advantage of documentary-style sequences and interviews that increase the truthfulness of the events narrated, he first of all narrates a story, transforming true crime facts into mystery narratives, although really happened. Indeed, the predominance of the fictional aspects over the factual ones is testified also by the overall construction of Blu Notte. as suggested by Giuliano Pieri, and I quote, while offering alternative hypotheses to the official lack of explanation of true crime, he does not support any. And ultimately, his exercise is rather anodyne from the point of view of real crime investigation, though from a fictional point of view, Lucarelli is a master of suspense and his plots work perfectly, end of quote. In other TV shows like Le Chiavi del Mistero, I Classici del Mistero, and Milonga Station, Lucarelli achieves the same goal to narrate a story, blurring factuality and fictionality, but from an opposite perspective, that one taken in Blu Notte. That's to say, through a process of factualization of fiction. In each episode of Milonga Station, for example, Lucarelli examines a concept like beauty, betrayal, and madness through the analysis of famous novels, not necessarily crime, to be fair, and their filmic adaptation. However, while Milonga Station and the aforementioned shows deal with imagined stories, they are narrated through the expressive codes of the true crime genre. In the episode dedicated to examining the notion of madness, for instance, Lucarelli describes Cervantes' Don Quixote in these terms, and I quote, "There is a man, a tall man, very thin but vigorous, with a dry face. He's a distinguished man in his 50s. He lives in Spain at the beginning of the 17th century, and he's a noble, but a small one, just an eye. He is not rich and live on a small income," and continue in this way. Transforming Don Quixote into the protagonist of a journalistic-like investigation, it seems that Lucarelli is describing the victim of a murder in a true crime show rather than a fictional character. The effort to undermine the fictionality of the stories through documentary style and journalistic technique is emphasized by the use of the interview with experts device. However, this convention of true crime narratives is employed here not to report or explain facts, but to comment on fiction, as here we don't have journalists interviewing witnesses or police officers, like in a true crime show, but we have writers who interview other writers. In this case, we have... Okay. In this case, you see, we have writers Giampiero Rigosi and Simona Vinci. There is the image here, talking with other crime fiction writers. So as we have seen, the interweaving of factual and fictional levels is a persistent element in the televisual career of Carlo Lucarelli, and it has been pivotal in order to create his meta-narrative aura as the Italian specialist of mysteries. When it comes to considering the importance of this aura in defining Lucarelli's production and activity, the TV show Almost True, aired between 2010 and 2012, appears to be quite an example. Each episode is structured upon the investigation of a case to be solved in a rock music history, a mystery that Lucarelli presents and unveils, taking advantage of repertoire shootings, archive images, and interviews with alleged witnesses. The obvious reference is to Blu Notte, with the subtle but fundamental difference that the cases presented in Almost True are all fake. For example, in the first episode, Lucarelli displays some evidence that Elvis Presley killed President Kennedy at the request of Anne Margaret, who wanted to avenge the death of Marilyn Monroe, a famous spy for KGB. Everything is scrupulously documented, but all the documents are falsified. In the show, Lucarelli operates a self-parody of himself and of his style of conduction, transforming the journalistic and documentary intent of Blu Notte into a semi-serious mockumentary show. Through this genre, which is based on the use of documentary codes and convention to represent fictional subjects, Lucarelli undermines the documentary's claims to objectively tell the truth by proposing fabricated stories and conspiracy theories as if they were true. The operation works only because Carlo Lucarelli mocks his own status as the most famous Italian professional of crime stories. In this sense, in Almost True, Lucarelli is a character and an author at the same time. While he presents himself as a reliable author of true crime shows, he is actually a character because he makes fun of himself, playing the role of himself as the Italian master of mystery. It doesn't matter if these mysteries are based on really happened events.
Again, Lucarelli blurs the boundaries between facts and fiction, but this time the means to reach the overlapping of these two dimensions is Lucarelli himself. From a narratological perspective, as Jean-Marie Schaeffer has written on the basis of Jeanette's work, I quote, "In factual narrative, author and narrator are the same person, whereas in fictional narrative, the narrator, who is part of the fictional world, differs from the author, who is part of the world we are living in," end of the quote. When it comes to Lucarelli, however, this separation frequently falls apart. As a matter of fact, we have detected 3 occurrences in which Lucarelli mixes fiction and reality using his own picture. He becomes himself a character, avoiding yet any kind of explicit connection between the real and the fake Lucarelli, but his name and silhouette. So these occurrences are Il giorno del lupo, that is the last title of the trilogy devoted to Inspector Coliandro, in Acqua in Bocca, the short novel we have already discussed, and in a graphic novel series, Cornelio, Delitti d'autore. In Il giorno del lupo, Coliandro, trying to help Nikita, finds out by chance documents on mafia's criminal activities in Emilia-Romagna. The disappearance of a consistent sum of money, the mail Nikita was supposed to deliver, has caused a sort of civil war between 2 main mafia's groups. While Coliandro is investigating with Nikita, in one of the final chapters, the reader finds a few pages with the story of a journalist named Carlo Lucarelli, telling in first person the meeting he has had with one of these bosses, as if he was writing an article for the newspaper he works for. And at the end of the plot, besides fake newspapers articles, a short fictional fait divers reports the news that one of the journalists of the magazine, Carlo Lucarelli, had been hospitalized after a fall in his own house. The circumstance of this happened suggests that Lucarelli's falling was not an accident, but no other information is added. So in this case, the fictional Lucarelli is a journalist as well as author, and that is all the resemblance between the two of them. In Acqua in Bocca, Grazia Negro is in one of the letters she sent to Salvo Montalbano, a letter hidden in a package of tamburini, tortellini, and tamburini is one of the most famous and ancient grocery stores in Bologna. She writes that she succeeded in hiding the message, and I quote, "thanks to the complicity of Tamburini and Lucarelli, 2 friends of mine," end of the quote. In fact, the present is from Carlo Lucarelli. And she is saying so that she is held by Carlo Lucarelli as if the author was living the same ontological universe as the character. Finally, in Cornelio, Delitti d'autore, we assist to the opposite event. If in the 2 previous examples, the reader just finds in the pages the name of Lucarelli with any kind of physical descriptions, in the graphic novel, the protagonist definitely looks like Lucarelli and represents a writer facing a crisis of inspiration and acting in a kind of horror version of the most famous tales of the Occidental world, such as Alice in Wonderland or Peter Pan. Although a total coincidence with his author failed even this time because the name is Cornelio. This character is, but nevertheless, this character is definitely a fictional counterpart of Lucarelli himself. So it is evident that the 3 examples do belong to the same narrative strategy, that is to flicker the picture of the author without falling into an explicit meta-narration or autobiography. While this narrative device does not prompt a meta-narrative reflection on the relationship between the author and his character, it is used as a postmodern game for the reader, who is invited to play the role of the slot by understanding if the 2 Lucarelli are the same person or not. In other cases, mainly in television, Lucarelli consciously plays the role of himself as an author, like in this cameo in the Italian soap opera Un posto al sole. I'm sorry.
That one.
And more significantly, in a promotional clip released for the launch of a new season of Coliandro. In both situations, although at different levels, there is an implicit meta-narrative reflection on Lucarelli's authorship. Our hypothesis is that this postmodern element stands for underlying the way through which Lucarelli constructs its narratives. That's to say, on a constant blurring of the factual and fictional dimension in a sort of mise en abîme of mystery and crime fiction itself. As we have previously seen, and I quote Lucarelli, la storia può essere più incredibile di un romanzo. History can be more marvelous than a novel, but at the same time, fiction is the instrument to go behind the undoing truth of reality. One dimension needs the other and vice versa, and the presence of Lucarelli as a character in his text is quite a kind of remark of this fact, of this poet of crime fiction, and his status as the Italian master of mystery, both in the fictional and the factual ones. In order to investigate this aspect, we wonder if it would be possible to relay this concept on literary posture. As Jérôme Mézeau himself has explained in an interview with Denis Martin, the concept of literary posture he has contributed to analyze after Alain Viala was specifically referred to what Pierre Bourdieu defined le champ littéraire. In few words, Mézeau has studied this concept mainly what we can call with Jeanette the paratext, like interviews and essays. But as he admits himself, it is possible to postulate the existence of a literary posture within the fictional text. But these cases would need other instruments of analysis rather than the ones he has used in reading the paratext. So we believe that the case of Lucarelli demonstrates the possibility to create a form of literary posture within the fictional world, a posture that is the result of this rhizomatic image, taken on the edge of the borders between facts and fiction, as well as genre blending and media hybridization, aiming at the construction of his picture as the Italian narrative of mysteries par excellence. What kind of etiquette shall we adopt to define this picture? May we call it a transmedial posture? But it is another mystery and a case that is to be solved in a future occasion and in a future conference. We thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much.